You're listening to the Talking Headways podcast network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the WHYY, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by, that's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to talk about the news. We're Han Solo today, but we've got some interesting topics to cover as always, so let's get started. We're back from the holidays. It was tough to get out an episode there at the end of December of the Monday show, but hopefully folks got to listen to a few of those flashbacks that we posted. We also had some episodes, and we'll share a little bit more about what's been going on lately and what was coming up in a second. But thanks for sticking with us. I always have ideas up my sleeve coming up for things that are going to happen in the new year, but my brain has been a bit slow to start this year. I'll let you know when they come up for sure, because we're going to try to do some really cool stuff this year, as we try to do every year. And so a few housekeeping things before we get started. The weather is still really cold, so feel free to order some scarves. We had a lot of orders at the end of the year for the holiday, and I hope everyone is staying warm. Also, thanks for sending pictures of you wearing the scarves or our Cars Are Cholesterol merch. We really appreciate that too. We've also been posting the newsletter intro into our Substack and on our Patreon page. So even if you're a free Patreon subscriber, which you can be if you would like to be, you don't have to pay to be in Patreon, but you can support us by just going there and hanging out and reading the newsletter intro. When I post it, I can see that folks are there reading it and enjoying their time there. But as we do when we're Han Solo, we have some updates on upcoming and a few past episodes. We got some great stuff coming up soon. I've got a final cut of the Kingwood episode. I've been getting closer to that. I'm hoping we can release it soon, but I'm holding it back a little bit because of some audio stuff with one of the phone interviews. I'm hoping we can get that cleaned up a little bit more so it's clearer, but that is coming soon because I have it mostly done. And before the holiday, we had Carter Lavin on the show to talk about his book, If You Want to Win, You Gotta Fight. I'll chat about that a bit more later on in the show. In this show, as well as we talked about it with him on our show, Talking Headways. We also recorded a few younger folks doing a poster session at Impact and released that as last week. The Impact Innovators, which is an organization inside of Impact that is a bunch of young folks and motivated folks, and they do really cool stuff. They do the Pechakucha, whatever you want to call it, during the conference, and so that's really fun. Next year is going to be Toronto. I'm sure it'll be a blast. But it was nice to kind of chat with some of the younger folks that are doing some professional stuff. And if you want to go to our site or in the show notes, you can download the posters of the folks that we talked to. You can download those. And also right now it's TRB, so there's been posters going on. So if you're listening to this and you're at TRB, go to the poster sessions. They're really cool. We also just chatted with Danny Perlstein of the Writers Alliance about the 1-year anniversary of Congestion pricing. That one will be out soon. I had a great time talking with Danny last Thursday. Jake Berman is coming on the show. He talked, actually I have that recorded as well. Talked before the holiday. He's coming on the show to talk about the Lost Subways of North America, his book. I'm also going to be reaching out to Jonas soon for our annual show. He just finished that blog post of things coming up, so we'll be reaching out to Jonas soon, and I know that's one of your all's favorite episodes of the year, so we're going to have that coming up soon. I still have a stack of books on my desk and have an interview this week actually about disability advocate Ed Roberts. The book about him, his biography, is out from University of Cal Berkeley Press, and so I'm looking forward to that discussion a lot. I'm about a third of the way through the book now, and he's just like an amazing person, Ed was. We also have an episode recorded that talks about the week without driving, and it's hosted by Anna Zievarts. I am not hosting this one, and Anna is, and so I'm looking forward to her discussion with all the folks that she had on to talk about that. I hope folks get a chance to listen to that one in soon. And so we have just a bunch of episodes. We have a bunch of episodes in the hopper. We have a bunch of episodes planned. I also, like I said, I have a stack of books. Let's see what's on my bookshelf right now. Frontier of Freeways, maybe one about El Paso's freeway, planning for the Caring City. I think I've had that one for a little bit. I need to reach out to those folks. The Chinese high-speed rail book, which is another one. I also bought Breakneck by Dan Wang, about Chinese engineering and the difference between the China and the United States in building things. I find that will be really interesting. Also, managing the magic of old places. So I got a whole stack of stuff up there. Sometimes it's a little daunting, actually, that stack of books. And it grows and it shrinks and it grows and it shrinks. And then it always looks like a menace, but it's always also really fun to get through it. And it's one of the reasons why I like to do the podcast, is because it gives me an excuse to read all these books in person instead of taking other people's word for it. I used to read a lot of like Star Wars books and stuff for fun, but I just, lately I haven't had a chance because we're doing all these books. But it's nice to actually sit down and read long form, especially when your brain is kind of addled by social media, whether that's like the Instagram or a blue sky of it all. So good to read a longer form book. Good that folks have written these. I know it's a lot of work for them, so I'm really excited to help that process go as well. And yeah, so what am I saying here? Thanks again to everybody who ordered Buster Bike scarves. As we mentioned before, if you'd like to order one, just head on over to theoverheadwire.com or email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Also, I've been loving the pictures, as I said, of folks wearing their scarves at events and rallies. That's what they're there for. And as we always note, we really thank everyone for supporting the show, whether that's on Patreon, patreon.com/theoverheadwire, or buying books on the bookshop site. Feel free to support us on Patreon and get the show ad-free. We'll have more Patreon ads later on in the show. You can also support us by going to our store, bookshop store, and ordering any book you want. It really helps us out, so I appreciate folks who have been doing that, which I know that there are folks that go specifically to my store and buy books, any books, and so I'm really excited about that. bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. Also, there's been folks ordering Cars Are Cholesterol t-shirts and other merch. Anything you can dream of, you can find it at TeePublic. bit.ly/cars are cholesterol, and all of these things are available. And also thank you so much for supporting the show in any way you can, whether that's just listening to the show or reading the newsletter, the intro newsletter, or just following us on social media as well. Anything helps, everything helps. Yeah, and we also strongly suggest folks sign up for the newsletter. We've got a new YouTube explainer up that I put up on YouTube, youtube.com/theoverheadwire, talking about how to use our archive if you're a subscriber to the premium newsletter, which is really cool. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. We're on our 20th year of the newsletter, and it's been since 2013 that we have done an archive. And so we have all the archives of all the links we've ever posted. There's 110,000 maybe now plus links, and there's an archive and a searchable database of all that stuff. So, and it's tagged by topic and city. There's a YouTube explainer. Go check that out if you get a chance. It's like 4 minutes long, so it's not too big of a commitment. Yeah, so thanks everybody for listening. Let's get this show going. This is what you've been waiting for. This is episode 183. We're live and in session. I'll try to get some folks in to come and join the show. I know that sometimes it's not as exciting just to listen to me talk, even though we do more news when folks don't come on the show, and we focus a little bit more when folks do come on the show, but I do like talking with folks about the news and what's happening. So I'm really looking forward to this next year and 2026 and all the good news that's going to come out. I'm willing it to happen. I'm willing good news to happen. Please happen, good news. So before we get to the show, I'll let folks know that you can get this podcast and Talking Headways wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Thanks to everybody who subscribes through podcatchers. It's probably why you're listening to this episode right here. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review wherever you get your podcast or wherever you find it, whether that's on social media, LinkedIn, or on iTunes. We really appreciate that too. So here's what you're here for. The news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. Of course, go to theoverheadwire.com and sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. I imagine most of you have or have tried it out and decided that it wasn't for you, or tried it out that you decided that you wanted to just do the intro because it was way too much of a fire hose, or you just like listening to this podcast with some of the reviews. So here are some of the news items that were popular in the Overhead Wire Daily, which we published actually for 20 years. Oh, it's been 20 years. We started it in 2006. I can't believe it. 20 years. We're in 2026. That's not possible. Here we are. More housing requires more skilled workers. To meet the demand, 723,000 construction workers must be added every year through 2028. And Angelo Farouk argues that the solution is a national workforce mobilization that will catch the supply of much needed skilled workers up to the demand. This was by Angelo Farouk in the Los Angeles Times. Yeah, need workers to build all that housing. Need to build housing to house all the folks that are going to be living in the United States. folks that have kiddos that grow up and they want to see them closer to home, folks that want a house that's not super expensive. We just need a lot more housing, and we need a lot more workers to make that happen. Congestion pricing brings better air quality. Cornell University researchers have found that decongestion pricing in New York City has cut air pollution by 22% in its first 6 months. Data from 42 air quality monitors observed for 518 days showed reductions after January when pricing was implemented. Researchers were surprised at the comparatively large size of the decline. This was by David Nutt in phys.org. And also congestion pricing in New York 1 year later. Data shows about 11% fewer vehicles each day in Manhattan's central business district. Traffic moves faster, noise pollution from cars is down, and transit rides are up. This was in the New York Times by our friend Emily Badger. So we're gonna we talked to Danny on Thursday, and so that show will be coming up in a few weeks probably. But we talked a lot about this stuff, so stay tuned for that. But it's really great to see the success of congestion pricing, or decongestion pricing, as Jarrett Walker always wants us to say. I have a hard time with that. Changing the language of stuff is really hard sometimes. Like, it's so stuck in my brain that it's congestion pricing, and I know that that's not the best frame. Congestion pricing, it's such a wonky term, but decongestion pricing I don't think is much better, just because it's the same terms, just a D on the front, and it doesn't really hit your brain the same way. So maybe I'll just keep it to congestion pricing instead of trying to change the nomenclature, but I don't know. What do you all think? What do you all think about the idea that congestion pricing doesn't work because it's it doesn't work for people's brains, not because we know now that it does work in New York City, but the word itself, the phrase itself, that stymies some folks. People oppose leaving regional transit. Several cities in the Dallas area rapid transit service area are considering leaving, citing frustration of the agency's absorption of limited sales tax money. A recent survey found very low support for leaving in Plano and Farmers Branch. And so this was by Alex Walford in D Magazine. Hi, Alex. How you doing? Yeah, so there's, I think, a lot of frustration out there because of the sprawl that's happened in some of these regions. Some of the surrounding suburbs are frustrated because they don't get as much value out of the money that they're spending for transit. And part of it's because, well, hey, you built sprawl. It's hard to serve that with good transit. And also you forced the agency to build these really wild commuter rail lines. Dallas DART is really a commuter rail system. It's not necessarily an urban rail system until you get to the downtown. And it's just been designed like that. And I think that's frustrating from a standpoint of, people trying to get around. You can get to downtown Dallas. You can get to the Mavericks games. You can get to other destinations on the corridor. You can get to the airport now. But it doesn't really work as a, kind of day-to-day thing. It's not like the bus system or other things. And so I think that's what frustrates people, and I think they don't quite understand why the choices that they made in terms of the land use patterns that were created over, the sprawl that was created over many years is what is causing these problems, not necessarily DART or the agency in the way that it's set up. And so I think that's just the mismatch that happens in a lot of these places where people are talking about the ineffectiveness of transit, but they don't really look at themselves, especially these suburbs, as the problem. Paris opens a cable car. The system, nearly 3 miles long, includes 105 gondolas and connects outskirts of Paris to its metro network. The longest in Europe line will carry an estimated 11,000 people a day on an 18-minute trip with stops. The trip takes 40 minutes by car or bus. The project cost 138 million euros, cheaper than new subway construction. This was by Sophie May Williams in Metro. Really interesting. They're going to build this. They built this 3 mile gondola to connect to the subway system, so they didn't have to build a subway, and it's going to be way cheaper, which is pretty cool. These have been shown to be useful in a lot of different cities, especially those with geographic constraints. I know Medellin in Colombia and other places have tried this, and it's really good to see large cities seeing that this might fit as one solution in the toolbox to get people to where they need to go. Why fast transit matters. Toronto's Finch West Light Rail has opened with much slower speeds than expected, sparking debate about how much speed matters in transit projects. Marco Chidi argues that people's finite time is valuable, and building layered transit networks that offer fast transportation shouldn't be too much to ask. This is Marco Chidi in Italian Urban Letters. Yeah, I think we have this discussion often about, what's better, a tram or a light rail system or a subway or a bus or all those things. But really, it's whatever gets people to to their destination fastest. And the layering of these networks, the way that we can put a subway on top of, underneath a light rail line, or a bus network, or a way that we can connect people with bikes or whatever it is the best way to go. And the frustration, I think, comes from sometimes we build, a lot of times actually I should say, we build these systems that we're like, oh, well, this sounds like a good technology. Light rail is a good technology, but it doesn't consider the way that people use transit. It doesn't consider the speed that people want. Here in San Francisco, I can get downtown in about 20 to 25 minutes. I can either walk a half block and get on the J, or I can walk a half mile and get on BART. And you know what? Actually, walking that half mile and getting on BART sometimes is more reliable because the J is on the surface, slowed down by the getting into the subway, slowed down by crossing Market Street, those types of things. It takes about 8 minutes. It takes 10 minutes to walk to the station and 8 minutes on BART to get downtown. It takes like 22 to 25 to 27, sometimes 30 minutes, depending on the traffic in the subway for the J Church to get down there. And so I think we need to have a real discussion about like speed and how fast we can get places, because people's time is very valuable, and they're going to choose that whatever works best for them and what's fastest. And sometimes what's convenient is a little slower, and maybe it's okay sometimes, but anytime you have a person who's running a light rail line and beating it, that's never a good sign. Noise barriers, and running, I mean by like actually literally running next to the line. There was a guy in Toronto who's been racing the Finch light rail line and beating it consistently, which shows that the line is not didn't seriously consider time constraints when it was constructed. Maybe it did a little bit, but it would be much better as a faster system. Noise barriers raise property values. Researchers at UC Berkeley looked at nearly 600,000 Florida properties within 100 meters of new sound barriers and found that property prices rose almost 6.8% within 5 years compared to a control group. They also estimated that noise has reduced U.S. property values by $110 billion, and that using quieter electric vehicles could provide a $77.3 billion property value boost. This was by Lisa Ward in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, sound. People don't like living near highways. People don't like living near noise, roads. The congestion pricing thing brought that up too. A lot of noise is just cars, car noise, the tires on the streets and things like that. Very frustrating and very noisy. And it's good, when you can finally live somewhere and breathe and hear a little easier. During the pandemic, we had a lot of folks weren't driving. The streets were quiet. It was eerily quiet. But that's just because we're so used to living in this place where the cars make all the noise and the city makes all the noise, and it actually could be much quieter if we tried. And people value that. That's why the property values are so high that are not loud. Road salt overused, sixth around. The U.S. uses double the road salt it did in 1975, even though more isn't always necessary. A recent citizen science effort in Pennsylvania found that salt was damaging aquatic life and potentially contaminating groundwater. An organizer says education can help. So telling people basically not to use so much salt, or you can use alternatives like beetroot juice or something along those lines. This was by Susan Phillips and WHYY in Philadelphia. Where speeders could lose licenses in California. Drivers who exceed 100 miles per hour could be penalized with a suspension or revocation of their driver's license under a pilot program that aims to rein in reckless driving. Each month, California issues about 1,600 citations to drivers going over 100 miles per hour. This is by Karen Garcia in the Los Angeles Times. When I was younger, I drove fast between my home in Houston and the University of Texas in Austin, and I never got above 100 miles per hour, I must say. The only time I did go that fast, a long time ago, hopefully the statute of limitations is over, but I was driving between Colorado and California, and I got on, I think, Highway 50. And there's some stretches in the Nevada desert where there's nothing, and you can see for like 20 miles ahead of you. And I think we got about 100 miles in an hour. I'll let you do the math on that one. But in places where there are people, I was never really going that fast. But that's a really insane amount, and I definitely don't drive that fast now. I think as you get older, you get wiser and you get a little bit less reckless. But yeah, it's pretty crazy, and it's good that people might have. That's where a lot of the crashes come, is reckless driving, and so it's good that people have some accountability. We just need to figure out a way to get people to drive slower. And sometimes governors speed governors might be the answer. That might be the way to do it. And I like Scott Wiener's bill talking about speed limiters that were just beeping at you at a certain speed limit. They have those in France. They have those in other places. I've seen it. They even have now even in your cars now, you can see what the if you have a navigation system, you can often see what the actual speed limit is, and your car in your system will flash at you or have a red circle around the speed limit, those types of things. So, it's possible to reduce these reckless driving of going to 100 miles per hour or over, even less. It would be even going under 90 would be even better. Don't speed on the highways, do the speed limit, maybe even do less. Study highlights possible downsides of forcing green changes. For instance, banning driving in urban centers might prompt backlash even among people who care about climate change, according to a new study in Nature Sustainability. The study involves a survey of over 3,000 Germans. Prioritizing trust can help move policies forward. This was by Tick Root and Grist. So there was a research paper, and basically they were asking people whether they were not annoyed, but whether green policies, whether they were frustrated by them or not. And I think there were things like banning meat and other things where if you tell people not to do something, they get even more mad at you, even if they are climate supporters, like climate change supporters. And then there's things like banning cars in cities, which the study kind of frustrated me because nobody's ever said we're going to ban cars just because of climate change in cities. There's people who say that tongue in cheek. There's people that say that, but no government official has ever said, hey, we're going to ban cars in city centers. It's actually for other reasons, and they give good reasons, like City Con in London, which is, respiratory ailments. There's particulate matter, there's congestion, there's all kinds of things, but never for climate change, quote unquote. Which is frustrating because in the study, it seems like they just use that as, climate change as one of their study questions. And so I think we need to be more accurate in our studies about what we're asking of people. But basically, they're saying, if you can educate people about why they might not be able to drive in the city center, whether that is the research on asthma or, particulates or less pollution or noise or things like that, they might be able to change their stance. But for some things that are very personal values, et cetera, like eating meat, apparently, to these Germans specifically, they are not going to budge, and it's going to be harder. Interesting study. I hope folks get a chance to check it out. And yeah, so I wanted to actually add on to that. I wrote a piece in the Substack as one of my intros to the newsletter, and it talks about a little bit about Carter Lavin's book, and then also a podcast that I heard from David Roberts of Volts. And I wanted to read it out to you guys because I thought it was just something that I really had an interesting time listening to the show, but also had an interesting time just writing this piece. Recently, journalist and writer David Roberts, who hosts the podcast Volts, had on an interesting guest to talk about misinformation. The guests, Samuel Bragg and David, discussed how the lack of trust in information and truth-producing institutions has led to more tribalism and social identity, leading to beliefs rather than truth. And because we can't do the research on every topic, we turn to those we would otherwise trust for information. The answer Samuel and David then believe isn't writing a new paper with the facts, reframing an issue with new language, or trying to get someone to believe the earth is actually round if they are already so positive that it's not, but rather changing people's social identities through organizing. To do this, people need to get involved and go through something together, which is exactly what Carter Lavin discusses in his recent book and on Talking Headways on transportation organizing. If you want to win, you've got to fight, is his book. Going and talking to people in person, getting them involved in a cause, and even better, winning a policy fight is going to change people's perspectives more than some white paper. This is why I think some get War on Cars podcast and the movement around safe streets and urbanism wrong sometimes, because it's more about a movement and bringing people into the fold on the issues that matter to that movement in order to get policy wins. The war on cars, not just bikes, and urbanist shows like City Nerd and many others like it have changed people's social identity to connect with certain values on active transportation. We often diminish YouTubers and social media stars in this respect to our detriment, as they are often the ones setting social identity markers and culture, especially among young people. We talk about congestion pricing a lot as a positive outcome and a winning issue, but what we haven't talked much about is the all-out organizing war that took place after Governor Hochul paused the implementation. After pausing pricing, safe streets and active transportation, traditional organizing and social media went nuts to push people to call the governor and state representatives to turn the system on. Thousands of calls were made, and I personally believe that if there was no pushback from the movement that had been cultivated over many years, pricing wouldn't have happened despite Governor Hochul's recent claims. But people don't like being told what to do. They want to come to that finding together. There's a recent study out from the Santa Fe Institute, which we just talked about in that Grist article, that finds people hate being told what to do on climate change. Even more than previously thought, people, 3,000 Germans specifically in the survey, don't like forced bans on things that would positively impact climate change, like reducing meat consumption or setting thermostat limits. And setting aside the fact that I don't think anyone has called for a central city car ban in the name of overarching climate change rather than improvements in air quality and traffic safety, people don't like the idea of government entities taking away the ability to drive somewhere they did before. Anyone who reads this newsletter, Talking Headways, of course, and listens to Talking Headways and the Monday show, of course, knows that fact. But European cities have been enacting city center car restrictions more and more, but not necessarily for climate change writ large. So what's interesting from digging into the paper is that the researchers come to the same conclusion as Samuel and David did with respect to the car-free city centers, though not other bans that were considered invasive of personal control like meat. Nonetheless, changing people's beliefs about policy effectiveness could support agreement with the targeted green behavior. If a person came to believe that, say, banning cars from cities was effective in mitigating climate change, dropping one's position to the car ban would reduce cognitive dissonance, unquote. So if someone organized with people enough to get them to change their mind because it fit their beliefs and identity, then the policy would become more palatable. I don't believe this is the whole answer, but it's part of a whole. We still need white papers and good information, but we also need way more organizing than we have now to get policy wins we want. As Carter mentioned on the podcast the other day, no one will say that we have too many transportation organizers. We still need a lot more. So I highly recommend going and listening to that podcast by David Roberts. It's really interesting to think about, and thinking about that idea of misinformation and what gets people to change their minds. And often it's social identity and who you identify with, and whether somebody comes to a different conclusion and then can guide people to the right answer through proof, through figuring out what the social norm is, figuring out a new social norm, changing people's minds by thinking differently about what the answer might be. And so, I love white papers. I love papers. I love, obviously, books and things that we report about and talk about on this show. But we also know that in order to change minds, we do need to do some organizing, which can include this here podcast or, listening to many other of the folks who are doing podcasts, or listening to your friends talking at the bar on the weekend with a friend. That still matters too. And that's the type of organizing that I'm talking about. It's not just going out and writing papers and yelling on social media, but actually getting together with people and sharing some ideas together and going through fights together, like the congestion pricing fight. I mean, that was a knockdown, drag out brawl on social media specifically, but also on the telephone lines, and getting people organized, getting people out on the streets, things like that. That really changed the tide. And so the organizing was what pushed that through, even though it was already known to be a good policy. You really had to change people's mind, and you really had to get that social capital through. Okay, now we got some bonus items here. A couple of items that I thought were interesting, even though they didn't make the top list of things that people clicked on. China's most recent autonomous driving framework has shifted liability for robotaxis and autonomous vehicles to the operator of the vehicle, which are the companies that own, operate, and manage them. This was in Cleantechnica. As cars continue to get bigger and bigger, some cities are pushing back with regulations that target vehicle weight and size. Many cities weren't designed for big cars, and it's not as safe for pedestrians either. This was in Dario AS. Yeah, remember that parking garage that collapsed in New York City because of the weight of cars? The cars have gotten bigger over time, and so the weight of the cars collectively on the parking garage made it collapse. Like stuff like that. I'm sure stuff like that's going to happen more and more as these cars get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so regulating some of these bigger cars that don't need to be in cities necessarily might be the answer on the way forward. Big cars are going to be necessary for some things, but they're not going to be necessarily for driving around cities for sure. Congratulations to my friend of the podcast and the newsletter, Eileen Higgins, on winning Miami's mayoral race, a transit rider and advocate through and through. Congratulations, Eileen. I hope you bring some needed inspiration to Miami on transportation policy and many other issues. If you want to listen to Eileen talk with us, you can go back to episode 423. I love chatting with her about her life, her transit use, and the way that we think about funding projects in the United States. It's really fascinating. She knows a lot about the FTA's process. For a mayor, I think that she's probably the most knowledgeable mayor maybe of the FTA process than anybody in the country. The LA City Council has voted to make permanent a permanent streamlining ordinance that reduces the 6 to 9 month waiting time for permits for building housing to just 60 days. 490 projects have been proposed under the existing ordinance. This was in the Los Angeles Times. Yeah, get that ordinance changed and get those permits, get that housing built, reduce housing costs, et cetera, et cetera. Go, go, go. The oldest social housing scheme in the world exists in Augsburg, Germany, and only requires residents to pay less than €1 in rent per year, plus 3 daily prayers. The housing was created by merchant Jakob Fugger who was at the time the richest man in Europe. This is Deutsche Welle. Yeah, they just have to pay less than €1 and make sure that they pray. He, I guess, wanted to set this up so people would pray for him in the afterlife. I guess it's done a good job and also provided some much needed housing for certain folks who are down on their luck or needed a little bit of help. After Hurricane Katrina, architect David Wagner went to find solutions from the places that lived with water, the Netherlands. The difference is gray and green infrastructure and a question about where water can go and where it cannot. This was Inside Climate News. I always am interested, in what happens when people go to the Netherlands and see what they've been doing and how they live with water and how, they make areas that are supposed to flood even in times when the rainwater is too much. It's really fascinating to see what people bring back from that. And I think this was an interesting article about that specifically. The city of Atlanta is over halfway to its goal of building 20,000 affordable housing units in the city. The city has made a lot of progress loosening regulations and hopes to fulfill the promise of building housing by opening up more city-owned land. This was in Rough Draft Atlanta. The great high grass prairie landscapes of the plains are few and far between as agriculture has stripped the land bare, but in little pockets of space you can still see vestiges of a once dominant landscape of oak savanna. This was in Noma. Not usually a typical article I would post, but very fascinating to look at what the prairie looked like before farming. Lots of tall grasses, lots of really deep roots. If you've ever seen an Instagram post or a picture of what the root systems of some of these prairie grasses are, it's amazing. And after looking at that, why the Dust Bowl happened, for example. But really fascinating to look at that and look at that article specifically and talk about some of the places in the prairie landscape that still have it. Some old cemeteries are still around that haven't been changed. They haven't been farmed, and so they still have that kind of prairie landscape. It's like 1% of the state of Iowa or something like that, but it also shows you what it used to be like. In Oregon, Governor Tina Kotek has said she wants to repeal and replace a transportation bill that she has recently signed rather than wait for a ballot measure to play out that has frozen funds. In the meantime, money would have to be moved around to backfill the need, likely money from local controversial highway expansions. The other likely related kicker is that ODOT staff likely hid the true cost of the interstate bridge project between Oregon and Washington state, which is estimated to be now around $13.6 billion and as much as $17 billion, up from $6 billion. All this coming out now could mean the project is really dead and perhaps gives the governor a do-over for the state bill. And last two items here. A new report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics states that Houston area households spend almost 20% of their income on transportation, the highest in the country. Adding in housing costs to transportation in the region was the third most expensive behind San Diego and Tampa. This is by Houston Public Media. They were looking at those Bureau of Labor Statistics. Highly recommend checking those statistics out because it's interesting to see how much stuff costs people and where it puts you when you add housing plus transportation plus food together, or housing plus transportation or other things in the budget. And finally, a new ordinance in Santa Fe, Mexico will link the minimum wage to the cost of housing. The ordinance gives the city an incentive to try and reduce housing costs while also supporting workers. It also gives businesses a reason to support building more housing as well, because if they support more housing, then the minimum wage won't go up as much. So that would be a win-win as well. This was in KRWG in Santa Fe. All right. Well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. Keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had tons of people signing up recently, so we really appreciate that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you one of our our bus or bike only scarves. And if you want to do just $1 a month, you can get this podcast, Talking Headways, ad free. Free of outside ads, not the ones that I'm giving you right now, but generally outside ads. We're going to likely start trying to, we'll probably put a few more ads in the podcast just to make up for some cost increases that have been happening lately. But we'll see what happens, and we're looking forward to more folks signing up on Patreon, even if it's the free version. There's a free version too. You can sign up on Patreon and just follow and see what we're writing for our intros once or twice a week. So that would be great too. Listener questions and comments. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. If you have any questions, shoot them over to theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I really appreciate folks that are writing in. I really appreciate folks that are writing in, even if you guys say, don't read this on the air. But most of the time, you all have been pretty good about that. Or just let me know what you're thinking, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. I don't mind. Just send it in and let me know how we're doing. And finally, Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we're talking about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. This week, let's see, what have we been doing lately? I went to my daughter's first soccer practice. That was super fun. Been moving around the city on Muni, those types of things. Just, the usual stuff, cleaning up after Christmas, taking down all the lights and all the stuff, getting ready for the new year. Yeah, January is kind of weird because it's such a kind of a bummer after that high of December and November and October. I mean, those 3 months are just powerhouses for me. I love Halloween. I love fall. I love orange and pumpkins and all that stuff. And then in November, obviously Thanksgiving and getting ready for Christmas, and then Christmas in December, and all the singing the songs and getting ready for the holidays and everything is just super fun, especially when you have a little one in the house. Cora is a really big fan of Christmas songs and stuff like that. So we're going back to school. She's really excited about that too, so that's good as well. But just living life, and haven't really watched a lot of television. I have been watching the American Revolution on PBS. I did do that. Really fascinating. I hope folks get a chance to check that out. I have been watching sports, and I have been watching some YouTube channels related to making pasta and stuff like that, but nothing too exciting. Maybe I'll have a better one next week when we come back for the Monday show and for Puppies and Butterflies. All right. Well, you can find me on Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, Instagram, sometimes Threads, Substack, YouTube, and of course on my website and in your inbox every morning if you sign up for the newsletter. And on Flickr, it's Transit Nerds. I really need to get all those pictures from China up on my Flickr. I have a couple, but not too many. I'll try to do that soon. I know I promise a lot of things, but I'll try to. And if I don't, give me a reminder. I don't mind reminders. Everything else is at the Overhead Wire. Thanks for joining us on Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks for generous Patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Talking